Hi, I'm Paras. I work as an equity research analyst. This is an interview with Rish. He's a software engineer at Revolut and previously worked at Google. The world is rapidly changing. Of the many things that are in flux, AI is causing a revolution in knowledge work. Its effects are being felt across the world, including on financial markets. I'd written a thesis with a friend on Adobe. My boss, Guy Spear, suggested that I should interview the people who help me understand the impact of AI on software companies and software engineering. That someone is none other than my brother, Rish. The interview that follows explores the impact of AI, the paradigm shift in software engineering, and help me better understand how the world is changing. I hope you find it useful too. So, Rish, very nice to meet you. We are recording this conversation to help understand, particularly for myself, as a financial analyst, how engineers are using AI, how it's changing the world. And with that, how about we get an introduction from you?
Thank you. Very nice meeting you, my brother. Well, thank you for hosting this. My name is Rish. I currently work as a software engineer at Revolut in Europe. It's an internet bank. And I work specifically on computer vision and preventing AI fraud and camera-related fraud for the bank to do remote identity verification. Before this, I worked at Google for 6 years. There, I led the Android Auto connectivity team on the car side. And that was for 6 years. That was an amazing journey as well. And before that, in the past, I worked at a defense company where we were building thermal cameras based on Android. And before that, in university, I built out 2 apps. One completely by myself that crossed 1 million downloads. It was like an infinite scrolling Reddit-like app back in 2015. And then later on, I co-built with a later friend of mine a launcher for the Android phone, which crossed 3 million downloads. So that's a bit about me.
So you have had a lot of experience in developing tools and have worked on a lot of tools. And right now as well, you're working on a couple of different apps that you have developed. And I assume that at some point in time, you started using AI as well, or the new generative technologies and figuring out what's going on in that side of the world. But before we get to the generative AI technologies, can you explain to me what each of those previous roles look like and what you did in each of those roles specifically, how development looked like? We'll get into the details. Yeah.
All right, so let's start way back in the beginning in university. So when I first started then, even before that, take a step back. The thing that I really just want to do is build products that a lot of people use. That is my core drive, and it gives me truly a lot of joy to just build stuff that then people email me about and they're like, I love this. And that's the thing that has been my driving factor. So all the way back in university, the first app that I ever built that got a bunch of users was an email client for my university. We didn't have Gmail back then. We used something called Zimbra webmail, and not a lot of people really were using an app for their email. And so I built this out. It was the development process essentially was you go on YouTube, watch a couple of videos, and you're like, just start tinkering around. And so you go from not knowing anything to just figuring it out along the way. Stack Overflow was the biggest thing back then, where when you don't know something, you ask a question or find a relevant question, and then you try to apply what someone else has answered onto your problem space. And so essentially,
Stack Overflow is like a web forum where you can ask questions and then people.
it's a question answer platform specifically for programming. They then ventured out into games and life, philosophy. They have, essentially this question answer platform for everything, but programming was the biggest one. And this was back in 2013. This is what everyone used. This was the way that development often occurred. I then, using that, it went from app to app to app. And I must have, at some point, I think during university, I had made 20 apps in total. I was just doing one after the other. And I think that was the period where I was trying to learn the abstractions to build products. And when I say abstractions, it's not just Well, of course, the programming in that, which is, you know, it's like Lego, say. The first time you build it, you kind of you've built something. It's nice. It looks okay. But the next time you do it, you're faster and you're better. And once it becomes bigger, you know how to build well early on so that later on, when the thing expands and becomes big, you know how it's going to be maintained. So that's one aspect of it, which is the programming side. But then you also start recognizing, hey, I don't just want to put in all my effort into building something that no one's going to use. So you start gearing your brain also towards, hey, let me build something that people will actually use so that your time is invested well. So anyway, throughout university, built all of these 20 apps. They ranged from like small games to utilities that people were using, like this webmail client, to finally Life Hacks, which was that app that crossed 1 million downloads. Again, most of it was organic growth. I had posted on Reddit here and there that, hey, I built this app, but it was just people finding it, people rating it, and that's how it grew. So yes, coming back to the question of what was the development like in all of this, come up with an idea, implement it, spend a lot of nights trying to figure out how to build that thing that you have in your mind. And that's not just programming, it's design, it's, you know, what it's going to look like, what's the user flows, what are those journeys that people are going to go through, how do you make it as less resistance as possible to do that thing that you want them to do, and then later figure out what are they actually doing. So that's the whole process. And then you go from like app to app to app, and then you sort of build this mental model in your head of what it looks like. And then I applied those to Life Hacks, and then Lens Launcher, which was that launcher that I co-built with a friend. And you know, 2 out of 20 crossed 1 million downloads. So that also gives you like the ratio of, okay, you really have to throw a lot of darts to finally get something to stick. So that was university. The startup that I worked right out of university called Tonbo Imaging. Should I jump onto that? Do you have any questions?
I do have a question about the different apps. When you were building the apps, I assume the 3 biggest ones that you focused on were the webmail, Life Hacks, and Lens Launcher. How long did it take you individually for each of those apps to work on till the state where you were like, okay, I'm ready to launch it to people? What were the timelines involved in the process for developing the app? So you talked about thinking about the user flows, thinking about the design, then eventually coding it, debugging afterwards. So what were the timelines involved over there? What was the effort looking like at each stage?
Back then, because I wanted to just build, I think I was very free in my brain of, hey, let me just get this out as soon as possible. So whatever I would build, I would just try to get out as soon as possible and then see what sticks. The webmail, the email app for the university, was super simple because it was, you know, I know exactly what Gmail looks like. I just need to replicate that. And that was it. You have a login screen, you have your emails, you click on an email and you open and see what it looks like. You know, that was the simplest flow. So I knew exactly what I have to build. I just needed to figure out how do I build it. So that was that. And then the push notifications of like, how do you send users notifications? That was a very useful feature of Gmail. So I wanted to, again, this is back in 2013. So apps were not like, you know, there was no standardized guideline of this is what it should look like. I was just replicating, this is what Google did. Let me do exactly that. So that was that. But then when it came to Life Hacks, I didn't actually know much about Reddit back then. It was just sort of built in parallel. Life Hacks was essentially a large list of meme-like images. It was just telling you hacks for everyday life. Like if you go to McDonald's, if you order cola without ice, you're gonna get more cola. So something like that. People love this kind of content. So again, they're just swiping. Then back from webmail, I knew people like notifications. Again, now we're at this stage in 2026 where like every app is just spamming you with notifications. But back then, that was not the norm. But the timelines essentially back then for me were, I built something cool, I want to push it out. That was essentially it. And, you know, quality was one aspect. I always wanted to maintain like, hey, does this thing work? So I always had like a matrix of, are these core user journeys working? And user journeys just being like, users going to open their app, are they able to log in? They're going to open an email, are they going to be able to see it? So stuff like this. And so I would always just maintain that. But then once that core stuff works, I just keep pushing it. So that was the way that I was doing it. And again, it was low stakes for me in that I'm developing it. If anything breaks, I'm gonna fix it immediately.
To put a number out there, let's say with the infinite scrolling app, how long did it take from start to finish, just till the first launch that you had, till you put it on the Play Store? How long did it take for you to make it, including the content and everything that went into it?
A lot. It was a lot. It was by no means figure it out in a day and then launch it. No, sir. So there was a bunch of things in that. So first, getting the content. So that was one aspect of it. And, I just essentially scraped a website, got all of their content, and then a bunch of other websites. I was like, oh, this is really nice from there. Filtered that out, and I had this static list of content. There was no user-generated content back then. It was all just from me and whatever I found. So I put all this together, and there must have been like 1,000 or 2,000 such life hacks that I pulled together. So that was one corpus of work. And then figuring out the app, and then figuring out the Play Store, the icons, the screenshots, the descriptions. Back then, you didn't have AI to help you with like, okay, help me describe this thing. You have to come up with it yourself. So like every part of it takes quite a while. To put a number on it, I mean, I think it must have been about 4 weeks or so at the very least. Again, this was me working during university where I was working maybe 4 to 6 hours a night. So essentially I'd go to university during the day, go play football in the evenings, and then in the night be building this. Again, why was I building? I just had the drive. I just wanted to build. That was it. But yeah, I'd say like 6 hours a day for 4 weeks is sort of the ballpark that I would put back then, because I was also learning along the way. I didn't know how to do this stuff back then.
You had the experience of building an Android app before that, which was the Zimbra webmail client, and then you had life hacks. So of course, you brought the knowledge from the previous project as well, carrying over to life hacks. In life hacks, you have to scrape the data and then till first launch, which wasn't what it finally did look like. It was minimum viable product that's going out. Let's see what happens. That took about 4 to 6 weeks, let's say, to put it on the Play Store. And then the Play Store itself has its own timelines of actually launching stuff, and you're able to then update subsequently. Okay.
Back then, if I can just say, the Play Store in 2013, 2015 was so lenient. Like I now recently published an app on the Android Play Store. The Apple Play Store is just a nightmare always. They even today take like anywhere between a week to 2 weeks, and they do a ton of scrutiny. The Android Play Store has been a lot more lenient. And back then it was like you hit publish and in a few hours you see it out there. So it was that lenient. And even till today, so like in 2026, you release an app, you get the result in about 3 to 5 days for the very first launch. Subsequent, it's just in 3 to 5 hours and it's out there. So it is still pretty fast. The other side of this though is it's not like websites. So websites you just launch and you get it out there and like immediately everyone has it. Apps are not like that. You can publish it, but then it's on the user when they're going to download it. So, and not every user downloads every single update.
Got it.
So just to give a number over there as well, you launch something today, in about a week, maybe 50% of the users have updated it. The remaining 50 is just a long tail of like, it's going to take a month, 2 months, 3 months if you rely on automatic updates. So usually developers just force a minimum version. You have to update after that.
So this was your journey in university. Post-university, you've worked at 3 different places. Maybe if you go a bit into each of those, and then we get on to AI after that.
Yes. So at my first job right out of university, that was Donbo Imaging. It was a defense company in India, and we were building a commercial product for the hunting market. So what we wanted to build was a thermal camera based on Android, which would be used for hunting. That was the problem statement. I spent 3 years there building that product out, and we built both the hardware and the software and everything that goes around it. So what I mean by that is we started off as 2 people in this project, which was just experimental. And at the end, it grew to about 15 people. And, I'm managing a bunch of software engineers right out of university, and I'm hiring them. I'm choosing who I want to work with. That was quite the experience, and I really loved that. The development process back then was for the first 6 months, because this was something that had not been done before, where you built an Android-based thermal camera. This was in about 2017, 2018.
Mhm.
There weren't, there was no commercially, well, there were a few samples that, we were trying out, especially in the Chinese market, that they had modified the Android OS, but there was no significant commercial market that was doing something like this. And the reason why we wanted to build a thermal camera based on Android is you get all the updates from Google that are so heavily invested in building this operating system for, well, essentially your phone is an embedded device. And so this camera
Right.
is also an embedded device. And so we get the functionality of the OS into
Mhm.
this thermal camera packaging. That was the
Mhm.
idea. And so it was a bunch of, for the first 6 to 9 months, I think it was just a bunch of research into how do we make this work. And again,
Mhm.
it was not as simple as Stack Overflow. You're not going to get any answers there. So it was really understanding the whole Android OS and like from which place to which place are these frames from the thermal sensor being sent up to the screen, and how do you
Got it.
display them? So that was probably technically the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life because
Mhm.
there's just no precedent before. So you have to figure out every single step of the way, and there's also no one to reach out to. So it's just
Right.
experiments, try it out. Does it work? Yes, amazing. If it doesn't work, well, it's another long night. And so that was the development process essentially there for the first nine
Got it.
months. It was just a bunch of research. After
Yeah.
that, once we figured out the MVP, which was, hey, we have this little board, we have the sensor. Can we package
Mhm.
it all together to make it look like a camera that could fit onto a hunter's gun? We did that.
Mhm.
Again, we had a team that was doing the mechanical housing for this product, and the hardware aspect of it is a whole different side of this, which, hardware is truly
Mhm.
hard. You don't have an undo button there. So if you mess something up, you're just like, okay, a bunch more money to get exactly the same state as you had before. So you put it all together. And now, once we had this MVP of a product, how do we
Mhm.
then commercialize this? How do we bring this out to
Mhm.
users? This was what the rest of that period looked like, the
Got
remaining
it.
2 years. And again, there, it was very like figure it out on your own. You don't have any, no one's telling you from above. How do you hire someone? How do you grow this team to 15 people? No clue. Just like run with it, do what makes sense
Got
to
it.
you. And so we set up our own processes. You set up your own testing schedule. Who's going to do the testing? What are the
Mhm.
user journeys that we want to be testing? How do we make
Mhm.
sure when we send this product out, is it functioning the way we want it to function? And then you have a continuous integration, continuous development cycle where you just run automated tests. How do you set that up? Like essentially all of this.
If I put it in easier terms for me to understand, basically you have a device. That device needs to run on Android OS because Android OS is a very well developed ecosystem. You have to figure out, I have a thermal camera with a screen. I need to figure out how it can work on the Android platform. And once you figure that out, you need to figure out, okay, how do I make it work continuously? And then once I figured that out, how do I scale it up and sell it to a lot of people? And in that process, it took you 3 years almost.
Precisely.
With that, basically, you started with 2 people, you ended up with 15 people. Uh, During that time, you had to figure out along the way on every step of the process what exactly it is. Okay, so that was your time at Tonbo. Maybe a bit about Google and Revolut very quickly.
Yeah. So at Google, I joined as a software engineer in this product called Android Auto. We were
Mhm.
given just a proof of concept, app that may or may not work on an Android OS car. It was like, here's something we've tried out. Go ahead and bring this out into production.
Yeah.
Again, it started with me and my manager and a third engineer. And then again, the team grew to about 10 or 11 engineers. And
Can I also ask you when you started at Tonbo, when you finished at Tonbo, when you started at Google
yes,
as well?
that is important given the
Yeah.
AI timelines.
Yeah.
Yes. So my first job at Tonbo was the end of 2017, which is when I graduated, up till mid of 2019. And then the end of 2019 is when I joined Google. And again, like there was nothing AI going on back then. And then you had 2020. So I was at Google until 2025. Yeah, so 6 years. All right. So at Google, we got this product, which was a proof of concept. the aim was to put it out into production. It's an app that runs on cars specifically, and cars that run on Android themselves. What we took, that product grew, again, the team grew from 3 to 11 engineers, and the product went out into production. It's now used by millions of daily drivers, and I led the connectivity side of this. Again, the challenge there is really, you have millions of people using this product every day. How do you make sure every single one of them works? So it's really about that problem at scale, and connectivity is a real big challenge over there, because your USB cable, for example, you just struggle to insert it sometimes. And so if you don't insert it properly, how does your software recognize this? How do you display it? For example, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is a whole different ball game altogether. So that was the corpus of the work that I was doing back then at Google and now at Revolut. So again, I think we'll go into the AI aspect and why I switched from Google out. We can do that now or later. But at Revolut, essentially, I wanted to get as close to AI or working, either build a product that uses this form of general intelligence, or this, I understood that this form of general intelligence is going to be used for bad. So how do you go on the good side and prevent it from becoming too bad? So what people are doing is they're creating fake profiles of people that don't exist, or they're doing account takeovers of people that exist, but they're deep faking their faces. And so we have to prevent that from happening.
Okay. So at every stage in all of your jobs, you've worked on very technical problems and developed technical solutions for them. Yeah. Now that we've started talking about AI, when was the first time you recognized AI and you thought, okay, this is useful, and started using it yourself? And then how did that lead to your journey from Google to Revolut? Let's start from there.
Yeah. So AI has been there since the beginning. I've always been inclined towards computer vision. So before LLMs came about, it was, you had classical ML, which was you build out a model, you give it a bunch of data, and then you figure out, using this data, can you derive an equation using which I don't know what that equation is going to look like, but hey, computer, figure out this equation for me given this data. And this is the usual number that I want to hit given each input. So that was essentially ML. And then you had this variant of computer vision, which I quite like, which was, if I give you an image of a cat, computer, are you able to figure out this is a cat? This was back in university, very interesting to me. I didn't quite recognize how this would be used out in production. The obvious ones were robotics, for example, or the factory. But it was sort of limited at that in my head back then. And so for me, building out products was the fun part in all of this. But then as years went on, I'm an avid reader of Hacker News. I like getting a general consensus of what Hacker News is essentially a platform where people post links to interesting tech articles, and then and then they comment on them, and you generally have this community of developers commenting over there from around the world. So that's what I use Hacker News for, just to get a general consensus of what are people thinking, what's their take, what's hot right now. And so when GPT, I think it was 2, came out, there was also this Tom Scott video, which I was like, he's like, okay, it gives you something, but
Tom Scott is a YouTuber for
yes,
audience.
yes, Tom Scott, the popular YouTuber.
He made a video about AI and predictions, I assume, of what's going to happen in the AI world. Yeah.
Correct. And he also used ChatGPT, which was released to a limited amount of people. And so you kind of get the impressions this is something, but I don't see where this is useful. But then in 2025, around April or so, actually, I think around January, I just took the subscription of Anthropic and OpenAI. So I was just paying initially $20 a month. And I was like, okay, let's try both and let's just try to build something out of them. And they were all right. Back then, it wasn't so effective. It didn't look like it's going to take your job. It didn't, it was like, all right, this is cool, but I don't know how to use this thing.
And this is only January 2025.
Correct.
So less than 2 years ago.
Correct. And then around, I think April, June, I was like, oh shit, okay, this is getting pretty good. And so I was building two apps back then. They were just something that I always wanted to build. And so I was like, okay, let's build these out. One was a distraction blocker, which was essentially, I just wanted, if I ever want to go into Instagram, I wanted to have a little bit of a break before I enter the app. And so you have to long press to get in. The other thing that I wanted was a screen pet. That was a second app. And I just wanted a cute little screen pet that would hang out with me. And, I was like, okay, this is like a greenfield thing. Let's see if I can build this out with AI. And yeah, around April, May 2025, I was like, okay, there is something here. And there was still a lot of hand holding. There was still a lot of, you didn't do this thing right. Let's slow down. Like essentially you were able to get pieces of code, right? You can't just ask it to build the whole thing. Mind you, today you cannot still do this. You cannot just ask it to go build the whole thing. We'll get to that later. But I think the real pivot, and so this was essentially back then, I was like, okay, this thing is going to become something. Around 2025 May, I was like, okay, this is going to become something. I need to make use of this period. And so my job at Google back then did not directly use this intelligence. Like you could use AI to write code, but that's just one aspect of it. But if you have this general form of intelligence, or something that looks like intelligence, I wanted to be working on a product with that. That was the idea. And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to try to find a different role. I wasn't able to find something located in Germany, which is where I live, within Google. A lot of the AI development is really just happening primarily in California. So then I found this role at Revolut. Here, we're preventing AI-related fraud. It's with cameras. I've worked on cameras before. It's AI, it's computer vision. I'm going to join this. Let's see where it goes. The pivotal moment, I really think, was around November, December 2025. That was like when Codex, I think that's when Codex 5.3 came out. I think it was that period. I may be wrong though, but it was, I'm certain about November, December 2025 being that period where I was like, holy smokes, this thing is really getting good. And it was basically around this period where I entirely stopped writing code by hand. I had around July already sort of stopped writing everything by hand. There was a line here and there, but by November 2025, it was just like, okay, stop. There is no point in me handwriting every single thing. It's just so much better to be writing in English and then just verifying what it's done. So that was that pivotal moment when OpenAI's 5.3 Codex variant. I think that's when it came out. If it wasn't that model, there was another one which was just equally so good.
So that came out in November, December. That's when you stopped writing code by hand. And then after that, it's been a miracle and everything's being written by Gen AI, or what's going on now?
It's so interesting. So here's what it is. It's a weird form of intelligence. It's so strange. It's very hard to put into words. It's so smart in some things, and then in others, it's just ridiculously dumb. And you're like, no human would do this. Why are you doing it this way?
Yeah.
And so,
okay, give me examples of both.
Exactly. I think that's where, all right. The things that it's ridiculously good at, let's go back to the example of life hacks, essentially like a Reddit-like app where you just have infinite scrolling, all right? The first time you ever build this, it's like you have to train your brain to understand, all right, so you have these little images in an infinite scrolling stream of just image after image. How do you model that into an app? How do you write the code for this? But once you do this a bunch of times, you realize essentially all an app ever is in the beginning, you have a database, in that case, database of images. Then you have a way to use that database. So that's the middleware or the API layer. So that's just an access to the database. And then you have the front end, which is the UI, right? So that thing is the UI uses the middleware, the APIs just call the backend the database, essentially. So every single product that ever exists is just this. You like at a very, very 10,000 feet view is just this. Database, use the database, the API layer, and then the UI layer, right? So that's the way. And so the first time you ever do this, it blows your mind and like, oh shit, this is how it's built. The next time you do it, it's like, okay, I kind of know. By the fifth time you're doing this, you're like, oh shit, it's just the same thing on repeat. It doesn't matter if you're building a healthcare app, if you're building an e-commerce app, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's always going to be the same jazz. And that's where you realize, oh, most humans are also just sort of, they figured out a pattern and now they're just applying that pattern. And so AI just is so good at that, so essentially the way that I'm working with it often is I figure out the database really well, and I figure out, what it is that I want to use with what I want to do with that database. Once you figured out those questions, writing the code is just trivial. You kind of know what has to be done, and then it's just step after step after step. You know what has to be done. So what was the question from the beginning?
You have not been writing code at all, and it's been Miracle Land since December.
Yes. So at some point you realize it's just pattern after pattern. You figure out, okay, it's the same jazz that a human's doing time and time again.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that AI is really good at. You figure out the model, and then you just build out exactly that thing. Using AI, once you figure out the core of what you need to build, a lot of the rest is just autocomplete. And that's what it looks like at a high level. Of course, there are many nitty-gritties and then the details, and the devil is always in those details. But at a high level, this is the way that I've been programming. And this works exceptionally well, especially for mid-sized apps. I'd say, if you have 1,000 files, I don't know, to put that into context, how would I do that? I mean, say even something like an Uber booking app, it is a ridiculously large app, but there are many different components to it. If you just look at the sign-in flow, that's a whole separate component from the driver, the maps, figuring out where is the driver on this. So that's another aspect of it. And so usually an engineer is not working on every single thing. You're not touching the entire thing. You're just touching smaller parts of it. Anyway, so but for really small apps, this thing is it works really well because you know what the database looks like, you figure out the middleware, you figure out the UI. And again, this is like a 10,000 feet view of what this looks like. This is the app side, similar for backend. Unless you have tens of thousands of users per second, generally, this is what it is. All right. When you have more, you figure out the details. All right. So this is the stuff that it's really good at. The stuff that it's weird and the example of where the intelligence just doesn't make a lot of sense, or the human wouldn't do it this way, is I think AIs today are trained to err to the side of safety. And so there's this thing called nullability or nulls. So if you know a value is going to be there or you don't know, a human would first just go check, am I guaranteed to get this value from the backend? Or if I don't get this value, that's like a breach of contract. I should be getting this value. If I don't, all right, stop the program over there. Something's wrong over here. LLMs, they err more on the side of safety. You're not going to go as a human, make everything null by default. And it feels a lot like they try to make sure the program compiles. And so all they want to make sure is I did my job safely. But the problem eventually shows up when you run the thing and you're like, but it didn't actually, it compiles, but it doesn't work.
Okay. So can we go through that step by step then? So you have, let's say, a banking app, right? The banking app needs to show you what your account balance looks like. If we can take that example and go through it with what you're talking about, how AI is bad. Let's take that, or any other example you think is relevant.
Yeah. Well, let's take this example because this is something that I deal with all the time. I always tell it, hey man, stop being so conservative. Again, this might be because of the system prompt. We'll get into that in a bit, like how these things are actually built and how we're interacting with them. But to go into an example over here, your bank from the back end, which is essentially the servers, they need to tell the app how much money you have, right?
Mhm.
And so you have an API which says, give me that value, right? And if you don't get that value, well, nothing should show. And essentially on your app, it should be raised and accept as an exception. Hey, something's wrong, please try again later. And so a human would err more to that side where it would be like, if I don't get this value, stop right over here. And so essentially when you receive that information from the backend and then propagate it through the layers up till the UI, essentially if you don't get that value, you just say in the UI, stop. What LLMs tend to do is they would say, maybe I might receive this, maybe I won't. I don't know. So I'm just going to make it, hey, I might not receive this. And then through every layer, they would just have this like null value, which is like, maybe I have it, maybe I don't. And if you don't have it, it just makes the whole code base kind of ugly because it's passing that value, which maybe you have it, maybe you don't. And you're trying to handle that up till the UI layer. That's not where the decision should have been made at all. That decision should have been way early and just raise an exception and say, hey, stop over here. I should have had this. This is just an example of like what a human would do. A human wouldn't say, hey, maybe I'm going to get this value, maybe not. No, it's a banking API. You better get this value. If you don't, you raise an exception. At this point, you could ask, was your prompt just very poor? Did you not do a good job on the prompt? Maybe, but I don't think so. I think it's just these companies are erring more to the side of caution, more to the side of safety, which make these models do something kind of strange.
It's not clear to me why this is safe or more safe, why this turns out to be the more conservative choice, because what you described as a human would be doing, that seems to me as the more safe choice.
It's safe for the LLM because the code compiles. And because the LLM, all it needs is, hey, is this code compiling? And have I satisfied the user's demand? If you just go and say, build me this app, it's going to try so hard to make sure it builds out that app. And so it's going to make weird assumptions. And this is something that I always do, which is like, yes, you figure out the way is always ask at the end of your usage, what were the assumptions you made? And did you make any decisions along the way that we didn't decide up front? And this is where you figure out this is what it did. And like, I should have specified this in the beginning because a human wouldn't have assumed this, but you clearly did.
This is very interesting because I've been watching a few of Boris Cherny's, I think that's how you pronounce his name, his video, and he talks about how he has stopped even prompting LLMs altogether and how he's making chains. I'd be curious to get your view on how that's possible if you're not discussing the assumptions up front or at some point, how it is that you're building in loops. But maybe a bit later we talk about that.
Yeah, let's get into that later.
Yeah. So if we go back to the original question, it's the good and the bad of AI then is the good is, well, patterns that exist already, it's able to recognize those and build using those very well. The bad is it has a tendency of being too conservative on the side of trying to make things run. At the end of the day, if you're building the website, it should show up as a website. And in that attempt, it can make funny decisions, funny assumptions in the background, which a human wouldn't do. A human would just ask and then try to build up from there.
Exactly. A human would stop in its tracks and say, hey, man, we didn't discuss this. Which way do you want? And even you don't always specify everything to a human. It's like you have a baseline of like, dude, you're going to make this assumption anyway. So like we don't have to discuss every single little detail. So it's more about that.
Got it. And in this, just because we're on the topic, with AIs, do you have to talk about every little assumption that you're going to make, or does it also make useful assumptions at times as well?
It makes a bunch of useful assumptions as well. I think this is the way. So let's take a step back and I'll tell you how I've been using these tools. And I think that's where then a lot of this would start making sense, right? So the way software engineers are using these tools, are you comfortable with jumping to that?
Yeah. Let's go.
Okay. The way software engineers are using these tools is the one that I like, which is through command line interfaces. Essentially, you know, you see those hacker movies and you see the green text on black background, you know, something like that. That's the terminal. That's where you're prompting the computer. It's got
Yeah.
very little user interface in that you're not pressing buttons, you're doing everything on your keyboard. So it's the command line interface. The CLI is what it's called. So you've got this, which is Claude Code, Codex, and Open Code is another example of an open source variant of this. These are harnesses. All right. So think of them as harnesses to use these AIs, right? So Claude Code, Codex from OpenAI, and Open Code, which is open source. Now, of these, essentially their job is to orchestrate or to use the underlying model for the task of programming. It can be more broadly for anything on your computer, to be honest. Like whatever your computer is able to do, if there's a command line interface to doing that thing, it can do it as well. All right. So its job is primarily taking this intelligence and then applying it to the use case primarily of programming. That's the harness. All right. There's been like leaps and strides in that thing that once you had these CLI interfaces, these AIs were really, it was useful to use. It was like, you now know how to harness these AIs. Before that, the second option then, apart from these CLIs, is something like an IDE, an integrated development environment. Is just a fancy window with UI to then chat with your AI over there, which then will make changes to the code, and you can see in the code editor what changes it has made. All right. So the examples of that is like Google acquired anti-gravity, which was formerly called Windsurf. Cursor is a big one, which is primarily also an IDE, and you're talking to your AI over there. And then the third way is like probably the most classic way, which is just you go to chatgpt.com or claude.ai and you have a window over there and you tell, hey, this is what I need. And you know, whatever relevant file you want to upload, you can upload over there. And it will tell you, hey, you probably want to do something so and so and so. And then you copy that back. And this is a lot like the old way of doing Stack Overflow, which, you know, you find a problem similar to yours and then you try to use that solution onto your problem. Here, with these websites, you had specifically, you know, you give your problem, it'll give you exactly the answer for your problem. And then you copy paste that. And then these IDEs and CLI tools just remove that loop. And it was just all done in place, which was you didn't have to go to a website to do this anymore. You could just do it locally on your computer. So that's the way. So the CLI is, to me, the way to use these tools. You've got the harness, which, you know, good piece of technology to use the underlying LLMs. Then you have, and this is where it becomes interesting. So now it's a combination of both the harness, how good is that harness, and how good is the underlying model. So the harness essentially has something called a system prompt in the beginning, which says you are a coding agent. You have to follow user instructions, so and so and so. And then you have a hook where you as a programmer can say, I want you to write code in so and so and so manner. And that's where the famous agents.md file or the claude.md file also goes, which is just a set of instructions that is sent with each prompt that you write into this interface. And then at the end, with this harness, you can also have a post hook, for example, which is once the LLM is done with whatever it had to do, run this, run XYZ, all right? And so that's primarily the job of this harness. You can do a whole bunch of more things, but I'll not get into that. Like launching sub-agents is a useful skill that this thing has. But anyway, so that's the harness. Oh, skills is another thing, which is just mind-blowingly useful. Again, mostly a utility, like it's a function almost used by this harness. So anyway, that's the harness. And I think that's like a really good way to use these AIs. My preferred harness is Codex. Is just so much better than, in my opinion, open code in getting out of the model what I want.
Got it.
Then you have the underlying model, which can be, so you know, I spoke of 5.3 Codex. Then there's 5.4, there's 5.5, and then you have thinking effort, which is how much is it going to reason with itself? Essentially, a lot like a human, it starts writing garbage out, or not garbage, but it starts writing its thoughts out, and then it refines those thoughts. So it thinks over what it just wrote again. So it just takes what it wrote back as input to itself, and it says, oh, but there's a mistake over there. So
rubber ducking, you have the rubber duck and you're talking to it as a human, and then from that talking, you figure out what's good with thinking, what's not.
exactly. Yes. So now what I would say is this common sense that I was speaking of earlier, and back to that question that you had of like, okay, what is the common sense that you're getting? 5.3 was very well trained, in my opinion, to do what I wanted it to do. 5.4 was not a general coding model per se. Like, and I wasn't able to get what I want out of it. And I just didn't really like that model so much. 5.5 is, again, feels like a very good general purpose model with good common sense. Again, it's very hard for me to define specifically this common sense because all I can provide is certain examples where I'd be like, huh, why'd you do this? But now to the question of, is the common sense getting better over time? For sure. I think with every model, it's doing the smarter thing, it's doing the better. Like, of course you have to do it this way, but now it's doing it that way.
Okay. So that's how you're using the tool nowadays, is you have it within your command line or your the programming interface. And over there you have Codex installed. Codex, then you're working with Codex to figure out what the next set of instructions are going to be. It runs through it. You go through what its output was, and you check whether that output makes sense and agrees with what you wanted. You confirm whether that actually works, I assume, as well. And if there are any bugs, then you tell it, hey, this is a bug. You have to work on this. So as a result, I also guess timelines have compressed quite a bit. Of what probably took you a month earlier takes far less time now, because you don't have to go through the process of going on, let's say, Stack Overflow, or actually trying to figure out what the underlying code base looks like. Right? So with these different tools, the first question I would have is, which one of these do you think is the most powerful? You said Codex, but let's compare it with a Claude, which I think you've used quite a bit as well, and Gemini or any number of the other tools that are available. One. And second, how much AI are you using, and what has the output of that AI been then?
All right. So first, let's jump with the last thing, which was how much am I using AI? I mean, like I said, and everything that I write now is just with AI. I'm not writing code by hand, and it doesn't make sense to me to be writing code by hand. The problem is these today's models, they overshoot and write so much code, so you have to, like, essentially the way that I use these are, you first plan out exactly what you need. All right. And like, I spend a lot of time on the planning. So it's more just discussing in English. Hey, this is what I need. And then figure out the plan. What's that architecture going to look like? What's, a high level design? Once you're happy with that, go ahead and implement.
How long would that planning phase take?
Oh, that's the longest part. That takes, well, I mean, again, it depends on what feature you are building out. How do I give you an example? I think I'll compare it with how it was in the past.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most reasonable example to give.
Yeah. Maybe we can pick something up like this, right? With the Zimbra webmail, you had the push notification, pull notification topic that you were talking about. What would it have looked like for your own self at that point in time versus now, now that you have AI? Maybe that's useful.
Yeah. For the Zimbra webmail, back then, the way that, and this is the way that I've always done it, which is, I know what I want to build now. Like, you sort of figure out, okay, I need to add push notifications. How am I going to do this? You go do a bunch of research, you go online, check Stack Overflow, check Google's documentation, check push notifications. How do they work in general? Load that context in your brain, and now try to apply it to your problem. And then now that you know what domain you're working in, what you want to solve, which is now fit in your brain. Now you go and like, okay, how do I implement this in code? And then I just like start coding it out. I don't really think of like the perfect architecture, the perfect, how is it going to look like? No, just like try it out. Let's see if it works. So a lot of it's always like first get the domain, then try it out, and then you can refine it afterwards. All right. So that's the way that I've always done it. All of that has just compressed a lot. So figure like, just reading, and once you enter a new domain, you're like, okay, push notifications. I don't know how they work. Let me figure out how they work. That's just like, you can spend a day, you can spend a week just learning. And so at some point you just tune your brain and you're like, okay, in general, this and this and this is how it works. All right. And then you go and figure out, how do I apply this to what I'm trying to solve? And so at best, I'd say the whole experimentation of like, how does this work? How do I attempt this in my code base? And then how do I clean it up and make it look good? If I'm working every single day for a feature like push notifications, say it'd take a week or so. And now with AI, it's just, I think this is the place which is like so tricky, because you don't need to have a perfect understanding of how push notifications work. It's 2 prompts. Hey, tell me generally how push notifications work on the back end and on Android. You learned this one, and then you have a specific question that from its response you didn't understand. So you're like, okay, tell me more about this particular thing that you have a question of, like on Android, but which service is actually doing the pushing or like the pulling from the backend, whatever question that you have. And then you're like, okay, I kind of understand. And you don't go deeper because you don't also know what else to ask. You're just not going to the depth that you used to, because before you really had to hunt for that knowledge. And so it would just be like, okay, on the way, you figured out 10 other things. And now you don't have that. You get specifically what you want. Once you've done that, now with Codex, what took a day is like 20 minutes of searching or like reading what it gives you, asking it questions, and you have to keep that curiosity hat on to be like, okay, no, tell me more. Let me understand this more. And then write it down, because your brain is like, if you do this over the course of a day, you're going to forget what you read in the morning. So you start making notes. But with Codex, it's always there. So you don't have to memorize it. It's just the next time you need it, you're going to ask it again. But, that's so poor for the brain. But anyway, so now the experimentation phase, again, what you would figure out how to implement, you'd go to Stack Overflow, you'd try to fit it into your problem statement. Again, it just does it for you. So that compresses into another half an hour, and then you have a rough draft. And then you look at the code and it's like, okay, kind of looks all right. But now, because it has done the writing, you don't know how, like, what the problems were along the way. Because when you are doing the writing, you know what problems you're encountering, so you know what the cleaner version of that would look like. But now it just did a whole lot of stuff, and now you're trying to understand what it did and why it did it, and like it does it in its weird common sense way. And so now you're trying to understand, why'd you do it this way? Okay, let's ask you, why did you do it? And then it responds, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. This could have been cleaner in so and so manner. And so now essentially what happens is, that whole thing, which would take a week, yes, you can get that down into a day. Like, yeah, I could do those push notifications in a day for sure, but I don't understand the thing in depth. And also it overshot so much, wrote so much extra code, and now I have to pull it back so that it's cleaner code now. So this is, I think, the best, like from a week to a day, but you still have a lot of ironing out to do.
Understood. And that ironing out is making sure that everything makes sense. You have to figure out what the assumptions were. You have to clean up the code that it writes, because it writes far too much code for what is needed by you. And that, I assume, is because it's trying to be too safe from the conversation we've had so far.
Too safe, and also like the newer models do less of that. They're not, they're just not always trying to satisfy you. And like they will not do the weirdest things just to satisfy your request. They will stop and be like, hey man, this doesn't make sense. But those older models, they're so compelled to answer. They will do anything to get you that answer, even if it's weird and doesn't make sense.
Understood. And when you are writing that code, every time you're sending in the request to or having a conversation with the agent, do all the instruction set that you've already established and the skills also go with it? Or do you have conversations with it and then afterwards it retrieves that? How is that happening with the AI tool then?
Yeah, good question. So, like I said, the harness contains inside itself a system prompt, or I don't know if it like not all harnesses may have that system prompt within, but if you go to like Pi is one of these where you can see literally in one little window it says you are a coding agent, you are meant to do XYZ.
You said Pi.
Yeah,
What's
there is.
Pi?
Oh, sorry, there is another harness called, it's
Okay.
an open source harness, much like Codex or Claude
Yeah.
Code or Open Code, which is also another open source one. Pi is this open source harness where you can see its system prompt. There, you can essentially specify what the underlying intelligence, the AI should be doing once it receives a request. So when you type something in, it's not just receiving what you wrote, it receives something called the system prompt, which says something like, you are a coding model, you have to follow so-and-so instructions, and then you can attach onto those your own instructions. And so to your question of, is it learning from what it does every time you speak? That's the sad part. No. So it's not. So you as the human have to recognize every single time I ask it to do XYZ task. Say, for example, downloading in a specific image from an icon's website. So if I need, say, the icon for the stop symbol or for the tick mark, there's a website that I go to. I, manually, like in the old era, what I would do is go to this website, go to enter in tick mark, go to that image, download that image, place it in the right folder, convert it into the right format, so not a PNG but an SVG, and then voila, it's ready for my app to use. But that's such a long process. It doesn't have to be this, and it's so repetitive. So you teach the AI how to do this because it knows how to go to websites, it knows how to download these images, it knows how to convert them into the format and place them in the place that they should be. This is a skill. You teach it, do this, and so the next time it knows exactly what to do. So essentially, you can teach it such skills. You're just writing them in English. And the way that I usually do it is the first time you figure it out with the AI, how do you do this? How do you download the icon and place it in the right folder? Once you've done that, then you ask it, okay, now that you've done this, write a skill for me so that future AIs will do this. Again, when you see the skill that it's written, it overshoots. It doesn't generalize. A human will generalize. This thing doesn't know how to generalize. So it's again I think this is another example of like, it will, like, whatever weird things it encountered on the way, it will also document those, which is nice, but they don't generalize for future use cases. So for example, the tick mark, the very specific tick mark symbol was not available, but you can search for tick underscore mark and that is available, and that thing doesn't apply to any other icon, just the tick mark. And like, it's going to write that down, which is okay. Like for the subtle use case in the future of finding the tick mark, that's relevant. But like, generally, you're not going to need this. So why are you writing this? And like, it does it for a lot of these specific things, which is like, no, man, you don't need to do this. This isn't going to generalize this way. Anyway, so to your question of, is it learning on its own? Not at all. You're still doing that skill creation. This is where stuff like this Hermes agent, which is, you have OpenClaw, Hermes agent, all these tools, which are trying to be smarter versions of understanding what you're doing with your computer. So being more of a general use AI as opposed to just, you prompting it within. I haven't gotten to those just yet. I haven't been, set up Hermes agent, in part also because tokens have gotten so expensive. So this is another thing. I think this is a little bit of a diversion, but let's just go there very quickly. When 5.3 Codex was out there, and I was using it up until June, they cut off access to 5.3 Codex a week ago. And that thing was 4 times as cheap. And what that meant was I could have 4 times as long a session as compared to 5.5. All right. So like, essentially I would burn through 4 times as many tokens and I was still able to get the work that I needed done. Now with 5.5, yeah, I'm able to get the work that I need done, but 4 times less. And I don't feel it's 4 times smarter at all. So they've gotten very expensive. Even if I had a post hook, which would on every call say, generalize what you just did and write one note of it. So they have something called memories. So in this harness, you could also put like a memories thing. At least Codex has what it calls memories. And it would make note of whatever thing it did for the future. Or you could tell it, hey, remember to do this. But again, when you read the memory, it's like, it's so weird. Why did you put in so much text? You're not going to need so much text. Make it shorter.
And therefore, your token usage also increases for however long the memory gets. So I was talking to someone else before our conversation, asking people, what do you want me to ask? And one of the interesting questions that came up was, do models opt for LLM-based solutions that will increase token spend? Are simple and free solutions less proposed or actively argued against by the LLM? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have it in fact. I have it in feeling. And in feeling, it's like, hell yeah, man. Have you seen what NVIDIA guys like Jensen Huang's been saying? He's like, if my engineer whose salary is, I don't know, 500,000 isn't burning at least 500,000 in tokens, what am I even hiring him for? And then you have like the OpenClaw guy, Peter, who I think Peter Steinberg is his name. He's posting images of his insane high credit usage. But these people also work at the companies where they get free tokens, and they're incentivized to tell people to use more tokens. It's like the incentive structure is a bit wrong. I don't want to use more tokens. I want to get my problem solved. So I think that's a weird incentive over here.
And this is true within the LLM solutions that are being proposed as well.
Yeah, on this, I'm not sure if the companies are training these LLMs to output more than is necessary.
Yeah.
I cannot know that for sure, but I do know LLMs overshoot so much. They don't need to have so much text. Like really, just in the future, to anyone who's listening to this, try to create a skill out of whatever you just did. So if you had a window in one of these CLI interfaces, whatever you did, if it's generalizable for a skill, like downloading an icon, creating a draft document, creating a plan, like ask it to just generalize and make a plan. Generalize and make a skill for the future. You will see the nonsense that it comes up with. And then you're like, okay, I see what you mean. This is like, it's giving me so much more text than is necessary. I don't know if the companies are training the models to do this. I don't think so. It's just these things are word predictors, and it's hard to know when it should stop. So I think it's more that.
And just for context over here, how many tokens or how many dollars worth of tokens do you end up burning every day on your job and on your own projects that you're working on as well, the 2 apps that you're working on? And from what I understand and what you've said also as well, is basically everything is being done by an AI right now. And what I'm doing is I am looking at it as, let's say, a manager does junior employees and figuring out whether it makes sense, whether it can be included, whether it can be pushed into the code base. So in terms of dollars and in terms of percent of code base. So what is the spend on AI and what percent of the code base is AI generated now?
Yeah, I'll tell you my personal numbers first. So today, as of today, I'm spending about $100 to $300 worth of tokens in enterprise every single day, which is a ridiculously large number. Again, in large part, I am blaming these companies because they've figured out their moat. They've figured out, or not their moat, but they've figured out their the way that they're gonna make money out of this, which is they've hooked engineers onto these tools. Now that engineers are on these tools, well, hey, how do we make money out of this? This is the way I feel about it. So this is a very personal opinion. But also, I know for a fact with 5.3 Codex, I was able to get a lot of what I wanted done. And it was like 1/4 the price. Yeah. And just on this note, A big problem is you don't have good benchmarks at a personal level. I've tried
Yeah.
building benchmarks of like, okay, how many tokens does this thing use to build out that project? How much does it cost me to do this thing? Because also they keep changing these models. You had 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 Codex, and 5.4 all available at the same time. Then they gradually got rid of a bunch of them. Now you just have 5.5 and 5.4, specifically in OpenAI. It's the same with Anthropic. They have 4.8, 4.7, and 4.6 all available at the same time. Like you just have all of these models available, and you as a human also need to understand how to use these and like what their form of intelligence is so that you know how to work with them well. By the time you learn how to use them well, they've graduated on to the next. So on this, 100 to 300 a day, which is ridiculous. That's enterprise, and that's where they're making their money. The subscription that I get on a personal basis. So I built this little tool where I can find out how much money I'm spending had I been paying by API. You can pay, you can do subscription or you can do API. On subscription, they're a lot more lenient. So for an individual, I think it's the same model of like get them hooked and then charge the enterprise later. I think it feels a lot like that model. So I paid on good months where I want to work quite a lot. I just get the $100 subscription, and then you're able to spend, I think it's like a ridiculously large amount, anywhere between 500 to 1,000 in had you been paying. And like with the $20 subscription that I have, I think it's also quite a large amount. I don't remember right now the number offhand, but I think last week with the $20, I had spent about $60 in that week, but that $20 is actually for the month. Yeah, so it's they're just the subscription makes a lot of sense for you on a personal level, but on a company level, like it's so expensive.
In all of this, I assume there's a lot of money that ends up going to NVIDIA, and let's say Google would have far cheaper costs for operating its model. I am curious to hear your view because you've used the different models. Let's say we have OpenAI, we have Anthropic, and we have Gemini. Let's take these three models. They're all trained basically on the same data, the openly available internet. Everything that's on there, they've scraped. And then they build, and these are conversations I've had, synthetic data on top of that, which is then also used to train the AI models. You have fundamentally the same algorithm that all of them are using to develop the models. How different are the models to each other? Do they have different personalities? How much is influenced by the harness versus the model itself? Your views on which model is optimal for you?
The personality is not really decided by the harness at all. The harness is more just how do I get the AI to do what I want it to do, make code edits, run these set of commands, use these skills, launch a sub agent. So it's not really much of the personality over there. So you can run with, say, Codex or Claude Code, the harness. You can run different models underneath as well. So there are proxies, and it's not the official way, of course, but you can do this. And you can also just take an open source model, an open source harness, open code, and use different underlying models. And you will see that even with the same harness, you get different results because the model is different. So the three models that I actually use regularly are Codex, the model being 5.5 from OpenAI, Opus and Sonnet, whatever the latest numbers they keep changing from Anthropic, so 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, and GLM 5.1, which is a Chinese model, which is completely open source, open weights.
Who developed it?
I think it's ZAI. It's another company based in China, and which is surprisingly completely open source or open weights. How do they differ in personality? They're all trained on the same data underlying, and yet there's this additional layer when they're doing the training for this at a, again, very high level. You train this AI based on all the knowledge of the internet, and then you go through this loop called RLHF. So reinforcement learning with human feedback. Essentially, you have humans which grade the answer of AI, which is hey, this was the wrong answer. Don't answer this. So now it's incentivized to do the other answer. This human feedback is the way to then train the model to have a personality that the company wants it to have. And so even with OpenAI, I don't know, you can see it in like chatgpt.com. At some point, it was just too friendly, too like best friend, emotional therapist vibe. How do they
Yeah.
get this? It's the human feedback that they're giving of like,
Got it.
hey, this is the way that you should be answering. And then it learns that, okay, so it's not an after the fact. It is at some point in the training process, it's being
Yeah.
told to have a personality. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. There's also this video from Anthropic of they're hiring a bunch of, or they already have hired a bunch of psychologists to understand Claude and to generate a personality for Claude. So both like
Oh, good.
generate the personality, but also understand it. And it's a very fascinating watch. And there's this very fun comment that said, "I'm so happy for that one psychology major who finally made money." It's like because Anthropic because they pay a lot of money. But yeah, so yes, essentially human feedback, you can choose that personality. The companies get a choice of the personality. You as a developer or user of the AI gets a choice of which personality you kind of prefer, but also those personalities change over time
Yeah.
and you have no control over them.
You have all of the models which are different, but is there any one that you have a preference for?
Yeah. So Anthropic from the very beginning has been all in on coding. They figured out, okay, we're just laser focused on coding. We're never going to do image generation. We're not going to do video generation. All our GPUs are solely going to be used for coding and science. And like you can see it in their models. They were the first ones to come out with coding. And I think, November 2025 is when, or earlier is when OpenAI folks realized the money is probably going to be in coding first. So let's invest all of our efforts over there. So they got rid of all these weird bets that they had. But in the beginning, I preferred Anthropic heavily. Then their API costs got too expensive. Codex was incentivized, or OpenAI was incentivized to get more users, coding users onto their platform. So they subsidized their rates heavily. I shifted there.
Yeah.
They give you a free month. They give you really high limits. All right, let's use those. Now both companies have realized they have a good margin of like who's preferring whom, and they kind of give you similar outputs. So, you're able to get the kind of work that you want done from both. And you're not getting a lot more intelligence, at least in my usage, you're not getting a lot more intelligence in one or the other. They're both around the same. And so it's really a matter of then who gives you better limits. And one month it's one company, another month it's another. The open source models are a step down. It's a huge step down of like in terms of intelligence. They feel like from a year ago. So it's just a waste of my time to be using them. And also the harness with which I use them, open code, I don't personally like it. So, you have a poorer model and a poorer harness. And
Right.
it's the sad part, which is like open source there's not a lot of money in it. So not everyone's incentivized to build that thing out. It's like you have something, but it's not perfect. It's kind of like, LibreDoc or versus Google Docs. Like
Yeah.
Google Docs is much nicer because you have so much money behind the thing. The last thing
Yeah.
that I want to say on this is Gemini is so far behind. Again, like this is my opinion. So there
Yeah.
are people who like Gemini, and there are benchmarks which show Gemini being useful, but the harness that Gemini has, Gemini CLI, is just wildly poor. After everything that I write to an AI, like the prompt that I give, I always write at the end, don't code, just tell me the plan. Because like
Yeah.
I don't want it to code because they're so incentivized to like start using and start writing code. But I don't need that. I need to discuss the plan. Like that to me
Yeah.
is the golden state. If we have aligned on a plan, the code doesn't matter to me. But anyway, so
Well, it does matter. It's the plan is much more important.
correct. Well, yes, that is the
Yeah.
right phrasing.
Yeah.
The plan is a lot more important. The code, once you have a good plan, you kind of know what the code's going to look like. Gemini is unable to follow that instruction. And I opened a bug ticket with them a while ago. I think this was even when I was in the company. And like till today, I'm not able to get Gemini to follow my instructions on Gemini CLI, which I mean, I give it a shot once a month, and I'm just like, bro, this is so hopeless. So stop. I don't want to waste half an hour only to realize this is not worth my time.
Yeah.
Again, Gemini, just to say this though, Gemini exceeds in other things. So searching, for example,
Mhm.
the other way that I use AI a lot is like Google searches or Gemini searches now, and it's really good over there. So like I get the answers that I need. So they do excel in some
Mhm.
things. Coding is not one of them. And I think Sundar Pichai also came out on some podcast that I heard, also said the exact same thing, which is like, yes, we agree we're a little behind on coding, which was like very
Okay.
surprising to hear. I was like, okay, I've not really heard CEOs come out and say this.
That's very interesting. One last question on this topic. Maybe there'll be more, but at least one that I have right now is you've talked about stuff that it's good at, stuff that it's bad at, but what are things you would not trust it to do at all, even if you have a plan in front of it? But are there any things that you'd say, no, I do not want it to touch this? It will not do a good job with it.
The first is I'm never going to let it just, if I give it a prompt of what it has to build, I'm not just going to start letting it build. And it's not enough. So say if we want to build, let's come up with some simple, like a delivery app, all right,
Mm-hmm.
a food delivery app. So you have
Mm-hmm.
a food delivery on one side, you have the website, or actually let's make it simpler, a library app, all right? So there's the librarian who maintains the catalog on a website, and then you have users, which on an app or a website search for that catalog in that library. Now, if this is what I want to build out, I'm not going to trust it to, I'm even going to say I'm not going to trust myself to be able to specify what I want so detailed
Yeah.
upfront that I just say, go build out a library app for the State University of Berlin or like State Library of Berlin.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to do that. Why? Because
Yeah.
I myself don't know what I want to build. And
Yeah.
say it spends like $200 in API tokens, and then at the end I get something. It looks like an
Yeah.
app, and there is a website at the back, and it seems to work. But like, no, it doesn't. It's not what I wanted
Yeah.
because I didn't specify what I wanted, and
Yeah.
also it didn't stop and ask me, "Hey, what do you really want?" So,
Yeah.
that's the first. So, under specification of prompts, I'm always going to spend a lot of time on the planning.
Yeah.
What do we actually want to build? Because humans are also poor at that. Like, you kind of have an inkling of what you want, but you're not able to communicate that into words. And so, putting
Yeah.
that out into words, I think if AIs were able to help you also get exactly out of your brain what you're thinking, would be a
Yeah.
very useful thing. Today's models don't do that. And so, I don't trust it to like one line go build because I don't trust myself also in being able
Yeah.
to specify. I don't trust any human being able to specify in
As accurately as the user would want it to be, or whoever is the customer would want it to be.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other thing,
And if we stick on that just for
yeah,
another second, you don't trust AI to do that because the human itself or the user, the customer, has not told you exactly what you need and what the constraints are, what the assumptions underlying it are, what it needs to look like, who the users are, what the user feedback is. So for writing the code, you require all of that as the background material. So it's not just, hey, go and build the database and the connectors to that database and then the UI. It's not that. It's the fact that you need to talk to the people who are going to use it, why they need it, what their usage is, which is why AI is not going to be able to do that, at least at the current stage.
precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. You need to first know exactly what you yourself want to build.
Yeah.
Like, a library for the State University or State Library of Berlin is going to look very different from a library in India, and like, how is it different? Well, first off, okay, the simplest example is like localization, but another is like privacy. In India, maybe these libraries tend to be a little more lenient than in Germany. And so you have to have that context. The barcode or the key, the system in which these are given out. I don't know. There's so many assumptions underlying. Yes, so go speak to that human, and the person you're going to speak with also doesn't know exactly what they want. So you have to spend, you as the architect, you as the builder, you as the designer have to figure out what really it is. And this is where I think the real benefit here is being a good product person and a good designer. Because designers and product people inherently are always geared towards understanding what they're building. And then for them, the building part is just an implementation detail. And now engineers are having to learn the other side of like, okay, I'm able to build whatever I want to build, but like, what do I want to build? So
Yeah, so that's one part where you won't trust AI.
yeah, and I think again, there's maybe a little unfair to say don't trust AI. I just don't trust any human to be able to specify a sufficient prompt. So that's one. The other, so, and that is just to build out the whole thing. The other thing which I don't trust AI right now is, I mean, there are all these use cases of computer use. So, it has free reign over your laptop and is able to do whatever you want it to do. I'll give you a very nice example, which was I used Codex and actually Claude Code both to ask it, why is my battery running so low in the last 5 days? Why does this work? Because battery information routes through the Linux system. So even on a MacBook, underneath you have all the same calls as Linux because MacBooks or like the Mac OS is built on top of it. And so a lot of those calls and like all of Linux is command line first. So understanding your battery health, what's been going on, which programs have been using the battery a lot is all documented and and you have access to this through a command line interface as well, or like a utility which is just text first. And so these AIs are able to prompt that or like figure out from that what's been going on. So, that's so useful. That's very cool that it's able to do this and like derive that information. Am I going to trust it to run those commands for me to change settings so that there's lower battery usage on my laptop? Maybe not, because I myself don't understand those. And I don't think they're smart enough that they're going to, because that common sense thing is a little off, it doesn't know what a human wants for their laptop usage. So it's those things like where I feel like, oh man, I want to first understand the thing a little bit more. But in a low stakes environment where, the thing that is whatever you want, whatever you give it access to is undoable, it's fine. Just like go ahead, do it for me. If it makes my life better, I will test it out at the end. It looks good. All right, very nice. But I wouldn't trust it for like, I don't know, deep settings like change my battery. Similarly, won't trust it for my finances. Like I'm not going to let it do buying and selling for me. I might do it for like, okay, here's 3,000 euros. Go have fun. But like for my entire net worth, no, like I wouldn't do this. But in the same way, I wouldn't do this with another human. And, like it's, I don't know, the way that I interact with these AIs is a lot like I interact with humans. And whatever you don't trust a human to do, how would you trust an AI? Like, you're not going to give your entire net worth, you're not going to give all access to your email, your credentials to another human being. Why on earth are you giving it to an AI? It's so strange to me to be doing this. I guess read access, okay. Like if you trust these AI companies enough, it is useful for it to summarize or to like send you something relevant from your information. All right. But like send emails on my behalf, maybe in the future. But I don't know. It depends on your level. I don't know how it works with like, at a high enough level. I believe not every CEO is responding to their own emails. They trust it and outsource it to a PA. Sure. At that level, okay, maybe I will do this, but they still probably take a look at important emails going out. I'll do that in the same way. The last thing is UI, just because it generates such terrible UI. Like it's just, I don't trust it to make good UI. I need to specify what specifically I want. Why? Because they understand text. They don't understand graphical user interface. So the way it works often is it'll write out the text and it'll take a screenshot of what it did and be like, oh, that doesn't really look right. let me go do it again. And so another thing you can do is like designers design in Figma. You can export that and give it to the model, or you can have an MCP server directly to Figma. And so it'll take that design, it'll understand the constraints and then build it out using that, but it doesn't really understand visuals so well. So, because it's a text first thing. And so, yes, most of these models are multimodal. They understand text, image, audio, all. Yes, but they still produce bogus UI. Codex of all produces such poor UI. And
can you give me an example of how the UI is bogus? So like it'll put the cross button at the wrong place. What will it do? Which is so strange about its UI generation.
so I was building this little tool for me to find out how much am I spending money at supermarkets across my 3 banks. So what I do is I export the little CSV files, or like the Excel sheet that you get from these banks, and I just strip out the important information, just have like who I spent the money to, which date, and how much money was spent. So it's like cleaner. And then I wanted to visualize this, all right? And I wanted to make a nice UI based on this. And if you give it no prompt of like exactly what style you're looking for, maybe you can even give it a bit of a style. Like if you have another website, you can say, make it in a similar style. It'll produce something that sort of mimics that style where like, okay, you have a similar background, but then it will, I don't know, it just looks so bad. It just like, I can't tell you how, like the usability, yes, in its training data, it knows humans might like rounded corners. So, it'll try to mix rounded corners with the background of that website, which just like a human would never do. It doesn't look good, but it doesn't know that it doesn't look good. I wish I could just show you an example of how poor it looks. Like do this as an example. I think this is the best example. So what I wanted to do was also my Blogger website, the place that I write my blogs, is hosted on Google Blogspot. And I wanted to move away and have my own, but I kind of like the UI over there. So I thought, why not use that similar UI? I asked Codex 5.5, replicate exactly that UI for me, please. I gave it a screenshot and I also gave it the link. And I thought this is going to be enough for it to figure it out. Man, oh man. It doesn't know how to match it one-on-one. The bigger problem there being the original website is just bloated. And so for it to figure out the important details is kind of hard.
From the text.
Yes, from the original HTML source.
This is very interesting. Not least because I recently wrote a investment thesis on Adobe itself, but getting the perspective from you about UI design is, I mean, it makes sense. If it's a text-based system and it doesn't really understand how design is built, it only understands it from the text and not like from people who are practicing design and making it and having the tacit knowledge of what humans like and what humans don't like. It's significantly harder for it. And with the training data, a lot of the training data you can pull from open source sources. So you can understand code and you can understand a few other things very, very well. But then design doesn't have the open source availability. And also with like financial modeling and Excel usage, programming languages don't have the best way of interacting with Excel. I don't know whether that's the programming language's fault or whether it's Excel's fault. But let's say with Python, it's a pain to interact with Excel directly. And neither do, or till recently at least, Excel wasn't very well supported by any of the models. I think they've worked on changing that. People are developing Excel modeling because, again, finance is one of the bigger use cases that you could have these knowledge work type stuff being aided by agents and AI and whatnot. But okay.
There is one thing on this, which I have not tried myself. That is a Claude design and also Lovable. So Lovable is more geared maybe towards designers, where you know what you want to build out. You provide with Figma what it is you want to build out, and then it'll build out a functioning website for you. So you can really try it out. But Claude design is something that I've heard of recently, again from Hacker News. I have not tried it myself. Word is that it's way better than
Okay.
the origin, just command line like Claude Code and Codex.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if it's the underlying model or the harness that they have. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
I think it is like they say it's better.
Understood. Just as we were discussing the topic of where you wouldn't trust it, I also thought maybe we can ask the flip side of that question, which is where is deep human judgment still required? I think we've touched on it throughout the conversation so far, but if you put it all together, where do you think human judgment is necessarily required and where you would want a human to supervise at every point or at a higher level the thing that AI is working on?
I think the analogy that I think of first is my manager or his manager. They don't really look at code ever. It's not their job. All they care for is, does the thing work and is it maintainable? And that even I would say is secondary. Does it work and do I get user complaints? If it works and I don't get user complaints and hopefully it is maintainable, it doesn't matter. Whether a human intelligence does it or artificial intelligence does it, who cares? So where I would trust it, if I have a very nice loop, and I think this is where the former question also that you asked of like the loops, how you're able to trust. If you're able to establish what you want clearly and you're able to establish a good testing loop, like what are the things that I need working, if you're able to establish that, then you can just have, whether it's a human implementing it or it's an artificial intelligence implementing it, it doesn't matter. So like as long as your input was, I need to build XYZ, and you specify it in good detail, like we spoke of, like that library example, what do you want? And like, how is it relevant to your context? Okay. What are the test cases? And like, when I say test cases, I mean user journeys. As a user, I'm going to go and take a book out, search for a book, see when it's going to be available, when is it going to be returned, list out all these and like in detail, because that's what a human cares for when they're using this app. So build that out. And then it like, if it's able to do this and if I have unlimited tokens, I don't care. Like if it's a human, because it's not touching, and especially for a greenfield project, like it doesn't matter. I would just like go ahead, build it. It doesn't matter to me whether it's me or a junior dev building this.
Right.
So I would trust it. Sure. Works for me, works for my use case, just as my manager or his manager trusts. Yeah, I trust these guys. They're doing their job because I can see the things that I care for are being met. So that's where I would trust it. The other place that I would trust it is just I think this is also very individual. And this is like a topic that I want to touch on, which is I don't think companies have really made that transformation to, or like even individuals in the company have made that transformation to adopt AI where they know it's not going to write brilliant code, but like if it's kind of maintainable and if it's a low stakes place, doesn't matter if it's writing brilliant code. I don't think so. If that thing is a very high stakes thing, then even with the humans that are implementing it, you want to be careful anyway. So it's like really just whenever you think of AI, replace it with a human. Where are you going to trust a human? Where are you going to give off responsibility to a human? Go figure it out. Well, you give it where low stakes. If it's high stakes, you want to have a little bit of an oversight. If you fully trust that person and this person is really incentivized to help me and like he's doing it or she's doing it from goodwill, okay. Like, but there's so few people like that. So it's kind of the same with like humans, exactly the same. With AIs is exactly the same.
That's both very interesting and slightly terrifying that it is at a stage where you're like, yeah, okay, it can do an enormous amount of stuff. And humans need not be the requirement over here anymore. It could just be you have an AI agent doing it and you need someone who's overlooking it and guiding it, but it doesn't necessarily require someone who has expert level knowledge on the topic.
Exactly.
because you raised the point, and I think this will be the last question before we move on to the next topic. Have you seen for yourself or amongst your colleagues or even amongst your friends who are working in engineering, software engineering particularly, have the managers or clients' expectations in terms of what comes, how quickly it comes, changed because of AI becoming much more useful today? And how has that change come about? Is it timelines are more compressed? It's expected to be done with fewer people. How are the changes coming about, if they are at
It's
all?
it's so surprising. Nothing has changed so far. It's so surprising that it's almost as if you're standing in front of a tsunami and you're like, dude, come on, this thing is gonna change everything. Like we have to change for this huge tsunami that's about to hit us. And industries are sort of still, I don't know, like all companies, I would say. Like I've spoken with a bunch of my friends. Most companies have drives or lessons to teach their employees to use AI, which
Yeah.
in my mind is like, what? This is ridiculous. Why do you need a company-wide drive, like an initiative, to tell people, hey, please use AI? I mean, that's just so
Yeah.
strange but also because it takes a while to get used to using this thing. So this is something that I had
Yeah.
done a while ago, which was when I was searching for, I was like, okay, this AI thing is going to be useful. Back in 2025, but right before I quit Google, around that period, for 2 months straight, I was just working with this thing every day for like 4 to 6 hours. I
Yeah.
wanted to see what it's capable of. And it was, yes, it was on my extra time, but like I absolutely loved,
Mhm.
figuring it out. On the other hand, I also had a lot of friends and colleagues of mine who gave it a shot and they were like, nah, man, this is not useful at all. I'm not going to try this. So you still, surprisingly, have people who have not fully adopted it so far. You have still naysayers who are like, no, there's nothing, which is, again, very surprising. And so, as for industries, they are right now in the phase of figuring out how to absorb the cost of the new API. Like, these API costs, they're exorbitant now. So industries, they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we absorb this new cost all of a sudden, which
Yeah.
is like, okay, we don't know if our engineers have gotten like 2x, 3x, 5x more productive. Are we making more money? But we certainly have more cost. So, do we explore open source models? Do we go and give OpenAI and Anthropic a whole lot of money? So there's that angle
Yeah.
of this. And then there's also people who are naysayers or people who are just not fully adopted it yet or made it their primary workflow.
Yeah.
So to the business, so far, I would say most of my friends that I've spoken with, their expectations have not yet changed because AI is here, because there's the whole company is still adopting to it, figuring out how do I make sense of
Yeah.
this. So it's still more in the
Yeah.
adoption phase as of June 2026. That's where
Yeah.
it's at. And I'm speaking of companies, big tech companies. I'm speaking of German, automotive industry, friends that work over there. Um, and also a couple of friends who work in quant and hedge fund,
Okay.
where it's not all of a sudden that, hey, we have this, okay, your expectations are like through the roof more higher, because it's people are still adopting to it and their
Yeah.
workflows are changing and companies are trying to figure out how do we pay for these exorbitant API prices. So that's that. I would say those who are using this, like myself, I feel so this is the interesting thing. So what am I particularly able to do now that this is there? I am able to do a lot more than I previously was. So
Mhm.
say if I was running at 1x speed, now I'm running at like 5x
Mhm.
speed. Does that
Mhm.
mean I'm able to get 5 times that work done? Not yet. And why is that? Because I'm able to do 5x proof of concept. I'm not able to do 5x delivery of the goods that I have to.
Okay.
So if you think of it like this, essentially, if I were a statue builder, okay, if it would take me, like, if I had to figure out, if I had to make statues, all right, and every statue that I make is a little different. For each statue, I can sort of run experiments. So this is the proof of concept, which really works well, which is I am here today, I need to be there. Which path leads me there? All right. And I can, like, all of a sudden start 5 AIs and try to get me to that point. All right. And this is the way that I do it today, which is I know what I have to build out. What path do I use? So if I was a statue builder, I just tell these like 5 AIs, go carve out a statue for me. This is the end goal that we want to reach. So this proof of concept works really well, where, I'm able to discover what I need to do very quickly. But second part of that is once I've figured out which of these statues work well, then I have to take that statue and piece by piece recreate it so that I can submit it to humans to review it. Meaning I'm going to take the head only and be like, okay, this is the head. Then I'm going to take the body only and going to be like, okay, this is where the body's going to fit. And then I'm going to take the left arm, the right arm. It's like you go step by step, because a human cannot review a large amount of code all of a sudden. They want a very step-by-step way of like, okay, how did you reach this thing? Which also makes sense, because you don't want all of a sudden a huge amount of garbage in your code. You want, like, logically, structurally makes sense. But like a lot of my time goes into that. So I wouldn't say all of a sudden I'm shipping an insane amount of code, because those harnesses are still missing and the common sense is still kind of missing, where I'm not able to trust it fully, where it's like, okay, this is what I need, just go off and send out the change for me. No, I have to review that thing, and it's a big change. Now I have to break it up into smaller, like 5 different chunks. And now that has to be accepted by a human on the other side. So yes, this is where it comes down, what it comes down to. The summary of this is exploration so fast. I can figure out so much more quickly. But delivering that thing, oh man, still takes me quite a lot of time, like a lot longer. So maybe, yes, I definitely have a speed gain because I'm able to figure out what I need a lot faster. But that submission process, my oh my, it's still so slow, because the industry has not adopted this new style of like, okay, let's just like, we need very strong testing loops, but we can afford lower quality code, because they're not producing perfect code, but it's, if it works, like I said, the earlier thing, if it kind of works, it's all right. But humans are still very much trained to have clean code and to, be reviewing that with scrutiny.
I think an interesting analogy over here is like movies and TV shows when they were made for movies and TV shows, like the big screen versus for YouTube, right? With movies, you required a whole lot of editing, a whole lot of inputs are going in. So you needed to be very careful with what's coming out because you needed that to be a hit. Versus with YouTube, you can just keep throwing stuff at the YouTube algorithm or just YouTube the platform, and then it doesn't have to be the highest quality thing. You need to keep figuring out what it is that you want. At the end of the day, you might get, let's say with a movie, you have a hit every 2 years. With YouTube, you might have a hit every 3 months, but you just keep throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I don't know if that shift will actually happen, where companies will be like, okay, it's kind of not perfect code, but it still works for our use case. So and it's not even about the company, it's more about the individuals, because, engineers want really clean code, and like the tolerance level for poor code is low. And I think that's the thing, where everyone's good enough is different. Some people want one release every year, like the movie example. I think that's brilliant, but like it's perfect. Others are fine with like, okay, let's just ship a lot and then see which sticks. But then say something works, say like a YouTube series or like a video works, and now you want to build out a whole series based on that. People loved the first video, so now you want to build out a series of that. The second video, you're going to think a little bit more about it. You're going to think a little bit more. And the third one, you're going to think even more. And so I don't even know if it is human psychology over there, which is just like once you've gained some level, you don't want to lose it.
Fair enough. On the delivery question, so you're able to build a lot more proof of concepts, but for delivery itself, you're not able to deliver as fast because of the processes that are in place currently that slow you down.
Exactly. And it's basically the way that code submissions work is you make a change. So it's called a pull request or a change list. So essentially you build something and you're like, hey, human, can you please pull my request or like approve my request? And then it'll go into the main code base. So
Okay.
that's what it's called, a pull request or PR. So usually you need two humans to approve in a bigger code base. In a smaller code base, lower stakes, you just have one approval and you're fine. That is the bottleneck right now, I would say, which is you have to write something that two other humans are gonna be fine putting their approval on, and you yourself, because, and this is an important thing as well, which is even if the AI is writing that code, you own that code. In my head, it's not AI's fault if it did something wrong. It is your fault. You didn't review it well enough if it breaks. You didn't test it well enough if it breaks. You didn't set the guardrails well enough if it breaks. It's just you have like a tool which is doing it for you instead of you doing it yourself. But a lot like your manager, when something breaks, sure, it is the engineer's fault, but it is the manager's responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen. So in that light, everyone is their own. And so this is where it's still kind of slow, which is, you still want to get something quality, some level of quality out, and it's not that quality today. And like, again, that common sense thing keeps coming back to me. I really wish I'm gonna try to document every single time it does something. I'm gonna document that's weird and doesn't make sense. I'm gonna document this because I think collecting that is very useful instead of just like, okay, trying to work around it and be like, okay, what weird decisions made. This is the bottleneck today.
So you'd mentioned that there are a few friends of yours or colleagues that didn't use AI in late 2025, or maybe even today are hesitating to use it. What are their reasons for saying that, no, I don't want to use it? And what is your rebuttal to that?
The reason they're not using it, the primary reason that I always hear is, oh, it writes garbage, or oh, I don't trust it. That's like the biggest, which is just, it's writing something that's useless. I don't know. This is not the code that I need. Yeah. So, or I just don't trust it to do the right thing. And it is true. It overshoots. It overshoots every single time. And even if you've discussed a very solid plan, it's going to overshoot. And then you have to trim it down. Like that's always going to happen. I think the second or third reason is also they're just in love with the craft. So they're just in love with the craft and they don't want to let go of it. And the way that I view this is it's like you're making a puzzle, okay? Like software engineering is a lot like puzzle solving. Like you literally have these small little pieces, you know what the end goal has to look like, and now your job is just like figure out which puzzle piece fits right after the next. And at some level, you realize this is just, to me, tedious work. Yes, there is some form of meditation, there is some form of craft in this, but you know exactly what you want. Like, you really need to set each and every piece brick by brick, like individual piece by piece, and find which one goes where. To me, this is just tedious, very exhausting. Like, it's fun when you're doing it as a craft or in your free time. I like that. It's like self-driving car versus your self-driving. I love driving, but man, I like taking the taxi or having a driver as well. Like it's both. You choose which one you want. But I think, yes. So I much rather prefer the design that the puzzle is going to come out with at the end, as opposed to the actual laying down of the puzzle pieces. I don't enjoy those laying down of the puzzle pieces at all. Well, I shouldn't say it so strongly. I enjoy it when I want to enjoy it. Like it's, you know, it's not the usual thing that I want to enjoy. Yeah, so that's what the people come to me with. Is like, I don't trust it, it writes garbage, and man, I just like coding. I would say my rebuttal to all of this is you've not used it enough to
Yeah.
understand how to use it. And like, they're not at fault. These AI companies, I'm telling you, they keep releasing new models every time. And now you're like, oh shit, this is kind of like the last one, but
Yeah.
it's smarter at something and not so smart at the other thing. Now, because it's gotten so expensive, you have to use the cheaper models for some stuff. And you're just
Mhm.
like, okay, this this cheaper model can do XYZ, but not like ABC. So now I have to sort of in my head be able to gauge which one it's going to be able to do, because I need to stay within my API limit
Mhm.
or like my subscription limit. And so again, I wish I could just tell it and trust it to choose which what, like, is the cheaper model going to be able to do this task. But it's
Mhm.
not today able to decide that. And it
Yeah.
often prefers itself. And so I ask it, but it itself doesn't know what the lower model is capable of. So it's like, and so this is another thing where people do, which is like you get Anthropic and OpenAI models to uh, write the plan and then have the cheaper model implement it. The open source models, the GLM or Kimi K2, all these like open source Chinese models implement the thing.
Mhm.
But it doesn't always, like, there's no good harness that I've found so far for this. I wish there was
Yeah.
a good harness that existed, or like, this is again maybe another side project that I could try. There are a bunch where like you can kind of configure them to do this,
Yeah.
but it's still not very cost effective, because what happens is you write the plan, you discuss it with the smart model, you get the cheaper model to implement it. Cheaper model during its implementation will find something. It has to
Mhm.
go back and tell the smarter model, hey, I'm stopping here because XYZ, you're like the plan, I can't follow it precisely. I have to change something. And even after it's done that whole loop,
Mhm.
then the smarter model has to go and review whether what needed to be done, is it actually done? So that's also expensive, if you're ingesting now a large change. So it's like, I don't think that whole loop has been set very well.
I do want to get to the future of AI as well, but before I get to the future, there is one last set of questions that I do want to explore, which is the market impact of AI so far. How have products for software engineers that you've seen so far evolved because of AI? How much of it is using AI? How many new products are coming for software engineers? The reason why I'm asking it is because software engineers seem to be at the forefront of using AI itself. This seem to be the ideal use case users of AI. And maybe later on as well, we can explore how you're seeing it in the general marketplace. Let's say number of apps, number of products that are being launched, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So the first thing, the number of products being built for software engineers is huge. The number of, like, even open source products that are being built is just a ridiculously large amount. Why? So wait, take a step back. Why is Anthropic and OpenAI all in and so bullish on coding? Because like, you can see immediately that, hey, it's actually useful over here. And why is that? Because inbuilt into coding is something called verifiability. So essentially, you can check,
Mhm.
does this code compile? Static analysis, does it look good? Or like, the formatting, the way it should be formatted, is it formatted right? So you have a bunch of like these verifiable sets of things. And so that's why all these companies are so heavily invested in making coding models and coding harnesses. On top of that, then, because software engineers are able to use this, essentially it unlocks for software engineers doing things that they weren't able to do before. So for me personally, for example, the Pixel Screen Pet app, I did not have the capacity to build that out myself all alone. Like, it's a huge project to have, you have animations, you have like the motion, it's almost like a game that you're building. And so just me, myself, I would spend so many hours building that out if it was just up to me. But with this AI, it's a lot faster for me to build this out. And so it unlocks that this product is being able to build for me. Sorry, I want this product. I have the capacity now to build it, which earlier I didn't. As for utilities for software engineers, again, there's a whole breed of software engineers who just like building tools. I myself, I would say I was also one of them. Now I want to track how much AI usage I have. So I built this little like status bar utility, which just shows me the number, like the API spend I have per day. There is utilities to, instead of using the command line, you have a nicer environment in which you can see the change that the AI is making, similar to the IDE. So you have like the IDEs were just the interface where you would make the code editor. Then you have the command line. Now they're kind of marrying the two. And there's there's something called Orca AI. There's superset.sh. There's Conductor. There are all these different UI tools, which are just to make this whole CLI interface nice. So there's like this variety of product also being built. So there's a whole bunch, I would say, which is being built for software engineers by software engineers. And then how does this transfer on to products for people, everyday people? That's also a lot. Like the markets are flooded with AI apps or like apps built by people using AI. And say, for example, the calorie tracker, Cal AI was this calorie tracking app that exploded. Some guy had this idea that I'm just going to take a screenshot a photo of the food that I'm eating, and AI is going to calculate how many calories that is. Wildly off in like, how does it know how deep, how much, which restaurant, blah, nothing. But built it, and humans want to track their calorie and like calories input. And this gives you a rough estimate of how much you're taking in. That app exploded, had ridiculous amount of users using it, and they did a really good job in marketing the thing. How accurate and trustworthy? Forget about it. It's fine. Kind of works. They built out that product, worked really well. So many people copied the thing, and you have now literally hundreds of calorie tracking apps. So if you go on the Play Store or App Store on Apple and you just search for calorie tracker, man, oh man, oh man, there's so many that are doing exactly the same thing. And I think there's just a flood of already existing things, some people are doing in their own way. Other people, they want to build a product, but they want it to suit them, and then they release it. A lot of other people are just like, hey, I see money being made over here. I want in as well. So I'm just going to release. I'm not going to think about it at all. I'm just going to copy exactly what they have and release it. And there's this variety of apps on the store as well. Yeah. And then I would say there's also a variety of people who, like me, didn't have the time before to build out what they wanted, but they had an idea, and like that thing didn't exist. So now they have the time for that.
So a lot more products will be coming out, a lot of copycats trying to copy what already existed. And you're going to have to figure out what other than writing code stops people from copying whatever it is that you have built. Because earlier it was time and effort and code and how much a software engineer costs. Now the cost of software engineering has dropped. So what else stops people from copying what you've made? I mean, in a way, if you think about it, Wordle wasn't particularly hard to copy.
My hunch in this is, I think the Wordle example is brilliant, actually. What you said, Wordle was super simple. But the guy had a huge community and people sharing this specific link, right? And similarly, for my apps, what I want is to be building out communities, because communities are hard to move. Once people are in on something, they like it there. They don't want to go to like 5 different stores. They get used to that one thing. And I think that's maybe the right way. I don't know. I think of it a lot like this whole boom of software engineering. Like the copycat apps are just terrible because it's low quality and it's built with the purpose of someone made money. I want that money as well. It's more built with that. Like if it was built with, hey, I like that idea, I'm going to copy it, but I'm going to make it better. Okay, then everyone wins in that. It's not bad for anyone. But if it's just done for the sake of making money, and there is a lot of those apps, like you just go on this Play Store and like search for calorie tracker, you'll see. But the community, the Wordle example is the best one in that, where they built out the community and now you have people sharing is similar. That's exactly what I want to do with my apps, which is build out a community where people like it and they sort of attach to your product. Oh, and this is exactly it, which is the videos. Content creation has never been easier. Like everybody can create content now. That's like the simplest thing in the world. You take your phone out and you start, right? It's hard to think of what you want to make. But do you see those trends? Like someone started the ice bath trend, and now everybody's doing it. And it's cheap views. Everybody gets a good view of like their ice bath. It's easy to create, it's easy to watch. Everyone's doing the exact same thing. So there's a lot of this as well with content, right? Which is you're not getting new information, you're just getting information told by a new person. And so
Repackaged.
yeah, it's just repackaging, exactly. All repackaged information. So it's exactly the same, I would say, with apps. It's just a little more effort to actually go and build them out. But you're getting pretty much the same thing by like a little bit of a copycat. I really like those content creators though, that they make it their own. So like if they do the ice bath challenge, but they like add their own twist to it. That's nice. You know, they put in their effort. And I think it's fine. Make it your own. That's all good.
That makes sense. I want to talk about the future as well. We get to that because till now, I think we're focused a lot on what has happened till now and how we got here, what's going on so far. The future fundamentally being unknowable is a hurdle over here. But I'd very much like to understand from you, one, what does your role look like today? And what do you think it will look like tomorrow? And similarly for, let's say, a junior engineer who enters the workforce, right? It might not be entirely relevant for the audience we're talking to right now, but I think that will give a very good understanding of how agents operate today or how AI operates today and how it will change what the workforce and workplace looks like in the future.
Yeah. All right. So let's start with what my work is like today. All right. I'll take a step back. At Google, I was, so I had essentially 3 reports, and I was responsible for like the 4 of us of what we deliver. And back then, the way that I started viewing it is I am responsible for the design, as in the design document, the architecture, let's say, of what's going to come, and then reviewing what is done by my reports. And then it's all good. You know, I approve, they did the work, voila. The same. And so now when I made this switch to Revolut, I started as an IC. So I joined as an individual contributor. And my manager was like, okay, do you want to start growing the team? At that point, I was like, man, the overhead, because at that point also we had unlimited AI usage. These companies were being very generous. At that point, I was like, the overhead of having another human being, training that person, growing more out of it, just felt like such an overhead. So, and then, you know, regularly meeting with them, making sure they're working on the right priorities, all that felt like so much more than, and I was like, no, you know, I'm going to be able to bulldoze through this. It's going to be much faster. I don't want to hire right now. And well, 6 months later, now we're in June 2026, and I'm like, dude, okay, these AIs are gotten expensive. I think a human's fine. And also, that job, like the job today is already very different than it was before, which, you know, first for me, I am able to tell the AI a lot more of what I want and get loops faster. And like the experimentation, like I said, a lot faster. And then the implementation to me is like a lot more of the boring part, and like getting that code submitted. It's like, okay, it's just like puzzle piece, you know, you have to build out that puzzle. But the figuring out part, very enjoyable. So anyway, point being, job today for me is we know what we have to do. We have to prevent AI fraud at this bank and camera fraud at this bank. what is it that you work on today that's going to give you biggest bang for buck, right? And where do I put my time so that I get this? Essentially, that's my job still. And it was, whether I had a human intelligence working as a direct report, or now if I'm able to do it with the AI, it's, for me right now, it feels very similar. So I'm able to, instead of having, say, 2 or 3 direct reports, I'm able to get that out and that work that I need done myself. But at some point, I think, so that's what the state is today. What the state is going to transform into, I feel, is the need for junior devs has already in my, like I said in the beginning, I didn't feel the need to hire a junior dev. It would be way faster for me to do it myself. Now, I think everyone just has to level up. And so this is the strange part. Okay, what does the future look like? I've thought about this a lot. This is the strange part where, okay, say you were running at 1x. Now you as an individual are able to run at 3x. But if everyone is running at 3x, nothing changes. Right?
Well, you do end up delivering far more.
Exactly. But if it's an infinite race, say like Revolut as a company was delivering at 1x speed. Now Revolut as a company is delivering at 3x speed, but all the other internet banks are doing exactly the same. And so essentially I see like 3 possible routes at a company level, but also individual level. I think they roughly fit the same, which is, hey, one track is of pure focus. We are an internet bank. Where are we able to put our bets so that, and again, I don't speak this on behalf of Revolut at all. This is just my thinking of like what individual companies would do. So say a company A that works as a bank, where are we able to put bets to grow? So all of your effort can be put into specifically that bank, and you're able to do a lot more in the banking field. So that's one. That's like pure focus, kind of like Anthropic did with coding models. The other model is somewhat like exploratory, what OpenAI did. They did like 50 different things. They had Sora AI, they had the app, they had video generation models, phone model, phone use model, computer use model. They had like every different model possible. Why? Because they thought they have intelligence. They have like general intelligence using which they can experiment and build anything out that they want. And so I feel like that's the second track, which is just an exploratory company. Their companies are not going to do only the thing that they are, like a bank's not only going to be a bank. Maybe they'll explore into like phone becoming a SIM card company as well, or like, they explore, venture out into different domains that are somewhat related to the banking, like maybe a booking.com sort of website where you get better deals. I don't know, like Revolut, by the way, is doing both of these things already, which was pre-AI, but I think they'll just expand a lot more, where they're just not trying to do a lot more. It could be. So that's the second track, which is instead of laser focus, you have exploratory. And the third, and this is like the future. So the way I view AI today is it is truly still a tool. Like it's that pattern recognition machine, and it's able to do really decent pattern recognition and able to write out code, solve your problem. But humans are still not accepting it into production just yet, which is a different battle of its own that'll be fought out. But so this is the model that we have today. It's a lot of pattern recognition. The future, say it gets genuinely becomes a general intelligence model, meaning it has that level of common sense, the thing that I keep pointing to that is very vague. But if it reaches that common sense barrier where I truly can trust it to be like, yeah, it's going to do the thing that I would have done anyway. If it reaches that, which we don't have today, if we reach that general intelligence, man, and what I mean by general intelligence is it has a reinforcement loop of like the thing that you also touched on, where when you're chatting with it, is it able to then remember or make notes of something for the future for itself? Not done today, and it doesn't generalize well today. But if it's able to do that for itself for the future, like even just in this CLI environment, man, that would be like, okay, now we're speeding up. Today, we're not speeding up in like exponential format. It's just a very fast tool. So that's where we're at. So the third track that I was on is if we reach runway speed, like, it becomes self-improving, and the model, the LLM fundamentally inside, like right now it's just stuck in time. It's frozen in time with its training data, and it's like that's what it is. It doesn't update its own weights. But if you imagine a future where it's actually able to, with learning and able to generalize what it did and then change its own brain a little, kind of the way humans do it, man, this thing, then it doesn't matter. I think at that point, all economics changes, all of human civilization completely changes. Yeah, so I don't think it makes a lot of sense to discuss the third option. That's the thing everyone's scared of. I don't believe today's LLMs are the architecture for that runway model. Like we don't have this infinite, ever growing, will become smarter than itself and like keep self-improving. We don't have that. If we did, like, yeah, then we would be screwed. We for sure don't have that today. It's a faster tool, and I think the way companies will change is focus and really like 2x, 3x, 4x speed in its own domain, or explore, venture out. And it's the same for humans then, which is me, if I want to do 5 projects at the same time, hey, I'm going to be able to do 5 projects at the same time. And if like, I didn't have that ability before AI, or I'm going to focus on that one project that I have and do 5x speed in that, because like I didn't have the ability to do that before AI either. And the last thing I'll say is smaller companies are so much more at benefit right now than bigger companies. And like, I think Revolut already is too big to take full effects of AI, in that it's an established bank with like 75 million customers, or like a ridiculously large customer base. You cannot afford to ship something that will break, so.
And in financial services, I don't think you want to ship anything that breaks anyway, but
yeah, but I think small companies that have a few eyes on them, not a lot, but a few eyes on them, I think those are the places to be, like that are able to use these AIs a lot.
And they can grow much faster.
Yeah.
What do you think? What skills will become more useful for engineers over time? Right. So you touched upon what is the bottleneck currently. It's the development getting into the code base, because you have to touch points with a lot of different people. Right. So I assume communication it always was important. It probably is going to become even more so important, because now you have to talk about what you're doing and talk with AI about what it needs to do, rather than doing it yourself. And you have to align with a lot more people, or you have to align with those people faster. So what, according to you, are the skills that become more valuable for engineers over time?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, because even though, yeah, like I did answer a fair bunch in future of AI. I think in the future of AI, we touched a couple of topics, but we can go deeper there, because again, no one knows what the future is going to hold. I have my thoughts about what comes, but who knows what actually ends up happening. Okay, but it's a good question that you asked. What is the future of an engineer, essentially, is what you're asking.
One, that, and for people who are engineers, what becomes more useful?
Fields start to merge into each other in some form. This is like, okay, think of it like this. If you are a product or a product manager or a designer, why do you need an engineer? You need an engineer to go implement that thing, right? Whatever it is that you want to build, you want someone to go and implement it. Like you as a product, you as a designer have a vision of what it is that needs to be built. Engineers go and implement that thing. At a very high level, this is essentially. And of course, already today, without AI, these fields sort of overlap into each other where engineers tell product people, hey, this is possible, this is not possible. Hey, why don't we do it in this manner instead? Or, you have the data folks coming in and saying, I need so and so. Like I see in our data from the users that they are experiencing problems in so and so area. Like you have already this like intermingling of all these people working together. This is the way companies work today. Say you are able to outsource, if you as a product manager are able to outsource the engineer's work, it doesn't really matter whether it's being done by an American engineer sitting in the same office or if it's offshored out to India. Doesn't matter. Like, you're able to get that task done. That's all that matters. And it doesn't matter if it's removed from India and now if it's done by an AI. Who, as long as that thing is getting done, that's all that counts. And so I hope these models continue just being tools that an engineer is still required. But, looking at how these are used, we either, to keep the same level, the same number of people in business, like either we need to start building a lot more stuff or we need to start shipping a lot more of the same. And like everyone has to have enough areas of responsibility. But okay, so the thing that I think is going to happen and what an engineer has to learn and like what the future of engineering jobs and product jobs and designer jobs, I think they kind of all become in some format owners of areas as opposed to owners of one code base. Currently, the way
Or one task.
or yes, correct.
Yeah.
Or one like particular, yes, task. So the way engineering is organized today is you have the Android folks as one department doing Android engineering. You have the iOS folks, you have the backend, and then you have the data team as well. Like you have all these different compartments, and then they all have to interact together to build out a product as well. So you have like this distribution of Android folks, but also of the product, which requires all these to come together. So it's this organization, and all this human to human communication is pretty expensive because like you got to first align on what you have to make, which you will align using some design documents or meeting together in a room. Now you have to make sure everyone's understood the task at hand and like goes and implements the right thing. Anyway, so you have all these different areas. I think the future might look like a place where you don't have an individual Android engineer doing only the Android implementation. You have area owners. If you're able to trust the AI enough to get that thing done, you don't need an individual iOS engineer. You might need an iOS code base, overall code base maintainer, that does like the gardening work of making sure everything sort of works well together. But you don't really need, you don't have like once you get to a certain level in engineering, you kind of know what okay code organization looks like. You will for sure not know line by line, is this the right thing or is this not the right thing? But generally, is this structured safely for the future? So this is something. And so what I think is how engineering jobs or how an engineer is going to change and what skills would be useful for an engineer in the future to that question is start learning a little bit more about product, start doing a little bit more design thinking. And for product people, it's start using these AIs a little bit to see if you are able to build out what your vision is. Like you're still going to have, with today's AIs, you're still going to have all these jobs remain the same. Like as in all the jobs that we have today are going to stay. I don't see them going away with today's AIs. You just go faster and you maybe explore more. But if you truly get to a point where you're able to trust these AIs enough, I think all these jobs merge into one in some format, which is just you own this area. You might have 2 or 3 other people to discuss more the product side, more the design, But then the
Engineer.
implementers are like, you don't need so many different implementers or like engineers. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Because what have you really gained out of this is speed. And that speed, what does it offer you? It offers you the ability to do a lot more. Now, what do you do with that ability to do a lot more? Do you branch out or do you go deeper into what you're doing? I suspect from a investor standpoint, businesses that go deeper into whatever it is that they're doing will do better than businesses that branch out too far out, because it's a competitive market in the end. People who are going deep into one thing are most probably going to do better than people who are branching out into 50 different things. At the same time, I mean, if you're very good on the central core thing and you branch out from there, nothing like it as well. One of the interesting things that we have noticed in our own home is that there is the concept of a citizen developer now, which person who hasn't written code or doesn't really know how to write code can start developing products. Right? So our father built a tool that helps take out Google Photos, the data dump, and put the metadata back into the photo, which Google Photos, for whatever reason, strips out of the photo itself. I myself had built, I think, early or mid to late, actually, 2024, a tool or just a very simple website that tells you how much Forrest Gump is worth that day. So how do you see citizen developers coming about? Because there are basically an infinite number of problems in the world, or a very, very large number of problems in the world. How do you see the likelihood of someone who, in a way, you already answered that, in that there are going to be a lot more generalists than specialists, but do you think it's going to be individuals who are solving problems, or will it be through a paradigm of businesses that are solving those problems going forward? Because now you can focus on problems not of 10,000 or 100,000 people, but even 100 or 1,000 people, if you can find the right paying audience from within that group. So what do you think?
There's this quote a friend of mine always tells me, which is, just because everyone knows the recipe to bake bread doesn't mean everyone's baking bread.
Yeah.
Like, there, you know exactly what you have to do, and yet you still go to a store, you still go to a specialist to go buy bread. However, if you so enjoy, having bread once in a while, well, your own, you make it yourself.
That's a very good analogy.
I think it's that. I think companies like Lovable are a little strange to me in that they want the general person to be able to build apps. But does the general person really think in terms of apps? Does the general person think in terms of, I wish I had something like this that would help my life? Like, it's almost, it's so funny. It's that show that we used to watch as children, Doraemon, and that little robot cat, basically,
Yeah.
that could do everything for you. And this guy who was, friends with this, always had infinite problems still. But he just had problems. He didn't know how to tell the cat how to solve those problems, or do this for me, and then I will be fine. It was like that little Doraemon cat would then have to think of like, okay, this is his problem. I have to put myself in his shoes. I have to see, okay, to make his life better in the future, how do I, all that thinking is outsourced to this cat. So I feel,
For context, also, what is Doraemon? Doraemon is an anime that had come from Japan. It was very popular in India. If you grew up in India, you probably know what Doraemon is. I'm sure outside of India as well, but it's a little cat, and there's this kid. The common trope in that storyline is the kid always is coming crying to Doraemon. Doraemon always has some invention or the other in its infinite pocket through which it can give the kid some solution.
correct. And so I feel like AI is solidly like representative of Doraemon, or like companies like Lovable, which are like, hey, you just tell us what your problem is and we'll give you the solution. But
Yeah.
like, no, the guy, the Doraemon, this little robot cat who was helping this poor child who was always crying about everything, had to do a lot of thinking of like, what's best for this character who's crying. And
Yeah.
I don't know if everyday humans actually think in apps. Everyday humans don't think in like, oh gosh, I wish I had an app which would look at my fridge and then tell me what I'm able to cook. Like, you don't think of, I want an app for that. You just think of, hey, here's in my fridge, tell me what should I make. I think it's a lot of this. So those type of companies don't completely make sense to me, where it's like, give us one line and we'll build it out. No, you forgot
Yeah.
all the context and everything that goes behind, and most people don't even know that, the whole
Yeah.
context. They're not able to share that. But anyway, so citizen developers like our father, I think the reason it worked is because he knows what he's struggling with, and he knows he
Yeah.
has to find like what solution to find in that. And that's why he's able to build it. And like, I think it's so cool that he did. But
Yeah.
it, like, we've seen it. It wasn't a one line go build it all. Like,
No.
it was so much effort for him to figure out, okay, this is what I need
Yeah.
in the end. How do I go out and build? And
Yeah.
like all the testing loops, like our father has done so much testing behind the product that was built. So yeah, I think those citizen developers for sure will come. Like, it's again the idea behind this being the time invested before AI in building products, the ROI just wasn't high enough for so many projects.
Hmm.
Today, the ROI is high enough that those projects which couldn't exist pre-AI will now
Yeah.
start existing. And the only thing that's going to take people there is citizen developers, yes, for sure, who will recognize, hey, this is the problem that I have, and they are inclined enough to be spending so many hours trying to figure out, okay, this is
Yeah.
specifically what I need, and then they go out and build that. But generally speaking, I think you're still going to have a bunch of builders whose primary job is building.
I agree. And they're all going to have the same problems that engineers currently do, with the added problem that they don't really necessarily know engineering as well. So if engineers have to build UI UX, they do know the engineering, they don't understand the UI UX, but yeah, they'll have one piece that will be able to help them solve it. I think just knowledge of a problem is going to be very useful in the future, that this is the problem, this is why that problem exists. Okay, then there's one last question I want to ask you before we end. If you're speaking to a room full of investors, what is the one thing they're probably overestimating about AI and software in general today? And one thing that they are underestimating? That question also assumes that you know what they're assuming in the first place. But
My assumption of what investors are assuming today is largely based on the $1 trillion IPOs that we're going to see
yeah.
very soon, and the sentiment around AI. So that's the assumption that I'm going in with.
And also the second part, the flip side of that, which is software companies, there's a massive sell-off throughout the market for those software companies.
Correct. All in favor of AI first companies. The infinite example, the runway example of like you have incredible AI which learns on its own continuously. If that
Mm-hmm.
ever happens, all of economics doesn't apply anymore. All of like knowledge work stops applying because you have something which is able to learn on the way, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll learn faster than humans. It's not going to need to eat, sleep, do its laundry. That completely changes the game. That's not what we have today. If we get that, that's a whole different world altogether. You better be invested in any company. It doesn't matter which company you're invested in, because like they will just apply that brain onto their business. It doesn't matter which industry you're in. Just be invested in some industry. That's what I would say if we have runway AI. We do not have that today. What we have is something that allows you to move a lot faster. You can experiment a ton, and you can ship what you have today faster than before. That's for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Whether that's 2x, whether that's 10x. Can't tell right now, but it's faster for sure. if an investor is hyping on the fact that, hey, AI is going to do, learn on its own, well, stop. Like, no, maybe in the future we have models that will do this. Then, man, like the whole world changes. But we don't have that today. So go in with the expectation, like, do you see businesses that you're invested in making a lot more money because their actual fundamental product became better? Or is it just because, they're inflated because they're doing something AI? Because like if they released better product, then sure, the value has increased for you. I think it really comes back down to that same thing. Like, is the fundamental of the thing still holding strong? And it's hard to tell from outside. And it's really hard to tell in an environment where everyone's trying to overhype. Like Claude came out with Anthropic came out with Mythos, and now they have today or yesterday, as of yesterday, published Fable 5, which is like a contained version of this so-called Mythos, which is like a cybersecurity threat for the world. And it's such a smart model, but it's not learning on its own. It might be very fast. Sure. So now instead of a 2x, you have a 5x. Okay, factor that in. Like, what happens to that business? If it's able to move that much faster, is it able to build out that many products more? If it is, then hey, yes, that's the place to be. But it is Mythos, Fable 5. None of these are by any means learning on their own. If they are able to do this, like, essentially this should be your test. Have some AI installed on your laptop, have it see what you do every day. And now if it's able to find and simplify your life, that is like, okay, it really understands what you're doing on a daily basis, and it's able to then generate stuff like, figure out your life and make it faster, make it better for you. Those models are not really able to do this today. And also they're so expensive that you're not going to be able to run these. And then there's those other concerns of like privacy. So you're not going to do this specific test. But like, I think it goes back to that generalization problem that I keep speaking of. Like, they're not, just ask any chat to create a skill, especially in these CLIs, and you will see what I'm speaking of. Like, they're not there yet. So go in with that assumption, price in the fact that, hey, you're going to be faster, but you're not. Like, okay, what do you get out with that speed gain? That's what I would say people, I feel like, are getting kind of wrong today, which is just like they think the end of the world is here. But like if you use them, or like not the end, I think it's everything, like everything everywhere all at once. You have all software built today, but you don't really. On the other hand, it truly is magic. Like it is incredible for me to be speaking with my computer via text, via voice, day in, day out. Like it's such a strange experience that I speak with AIs more nowadays than I speak with humans, especially at work. At work, I'm like 80% of my time with AIs. So it is a transformation for sure in terms of work. But it's not that runway of like, oh, this model is going to take over every single job. Not today's model.
Okay. And with that, I think we can close it. Thank you so much, Rish. Really enjoyed the conversation. I have taken away a lot, and I'm going to talk to you about it as well. But really appreciate the time you've taken out, and I think people are going to find this very, very useful. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Paras. And I must say, I really appreciate all the questions that you've put together. I think you hosted this super well. So I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for organizing.